Today's conversation is with Senator Duncan Wilson. I met Duncan when he was at the Port of Vancouver, and he was in charge of environmental and probably social issues as well at the Port of Vancouver. He's had a long, storied career. I feel like I have met him towards the end of his career. Not the end, but the middle. So it'll be really interesting conversation because from the Port of Vancouver, Duncan then became a senator in Canada's Parliament. So it'll be really interesting to see what he's doing now, but also to hear about his path, how he got there.
Good morning. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Ryan Haynes, and I'm joined today by the Honorable Duncan Wilson, Senator representing British Columbia and affiliate of the Progressive Senate Group. Thank you very much for joining us today, Senator Wilson.
Happy to be here, Ryan.
So we'll get started with a first little question. If you could please describe your career journey and what initially drew you into public service and environmental leadership.
Well, I'd say it probably starts with, I've always been really motivated by work with meaning. You know, growing up, like most kids, I had all sorts of different kinds of jobs and things. And then what really struck a chord for me was when I first started in public service in the early 1990s. I ran as a park commissioner in Vancouver at the ripe old age of 25 years old and actually got elected. And through that next 9 years of serving on the park board, I started to really get an appreciation for how much more engaging that work was than some of the other work I was doing. And that was driven by the fact that I felt like I was giving back, I was contributing. And so I think that that's sort of in terms of the nature of work with meaning. Then on the other side of things, I grew up on the coast of British Columbia, and spectacular place, and nature's all around you. And I was raised by my mom, who was a university professor at UBC, scientist, and she loved the outdoors. So we'd go hiking and cross-country skiing, and I love the water and boats. And so it just kind of created that affinity for the environment. So you take those two things and put them together, and that's where I come from. That's really what drove it. And then later, you know, as my career evolved, the opportunities presented themselves, and I grabbed them. And there's not really much more to say than that. I had at the port. I had the privilege of working for a fantastic CEO for 14 years, and he gave me the opportunity to take on the executive role that included the port's environmental program. So that was really my opportunity to step up, and hopefully I did a good job of that.
That's really good to hear. So it was really interesting to hear, though, that engagement piece, that public service aspect. Could you touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So probably the biggest part of my career was obviously my more than 2 decades with the Port of Vancouver. And when you get up every morning and you go to work and you know you're building the country, it's a very motivating thing. And a port is a very complex environment. And so there was never a boring day. And so you're never bored, and you're doing work that has meaning, and you feel like you're giving back. And, you know, you get beaten up every now and then because, you know, you'd have people who maybe didn't agree with what the port was trying to accomplish. But, you know, in my heart, I knew that I was going to work every day trying to enhance the well-being of Canadians and create a better, more prosperous country. So that really, you can't ask for more than that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And I think that's actually a great leeway into my next question. Through a little research on you, I've seen you've been quoted as saying you're passionate about the need for Canada to reach its full economic potential. During your time with the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, how did you approach balancing economic growth with environmental protection and social responsibility?
Well, port authorities in Canada are very uniquely positioned to be able to do just that. In fact, it's in their mandate. You know, I would say probably we maybe paid closer attention to the actual specific language in our mandate than maybe some other ports did. And the mandate requires us to, in addition to facilitating Canada's trade, to protect the environment. So it's actually in the legislation itself. And so, you know, with that, you're given this responsibility, and at the same time, you have a commercial function. And so the ports are uniquely positioned to be able to invest back into the environment because that's, you know, they're required to do that, and they're commercial, so they're generating revenue. But for some of the biggest stuff that we did, it was totally business case. It's what you need to do to either get a project built or it was just good business. So in the case of, say, we built a lot of habitat projects, Habitat Bank, we ran a habitat bank with Fisheries and Oceans. We would build all sorts of habitat. We would do that in partnership with First Nations, for example. And that habitat would be used to offset against port development. So, millions of dollars get spent on these projects. You partner with Indigenous communities, and the end result is you're improving habitat, but you're also facilitating that growth. So I'd say that's a really good example of where that would come to play.
Good, that's a great answer. Fantastic. Thank you. And also, in that research, I saw that you were globally recognized, the port, under your leadership during that time it was globally recognized for its environmental and sustainability initiatives. Did you want to speak on that? Anything you're passionate about in particular?
Well, you might have gotten from my first answer, I'm particularly passionate about the marine environment. So anything to do with the marine environment, fish habitat, all of that was sort of where I was probably the most driven. But a lot of where we got kudos for was actually in our on the air side of things, in terms of the work that we were doing around energy efficiency to reduce energy utilization, reduce the carbon footprint of the port. The work that my team did internationally with the IMO and International Maritime Organization and others to really lead in that space. We also did something it's still going on today, and it's such a cool program, and this is back again to the business case for doing some of these things. We recognized as we were advancing a major project that project was located in southern resident killer whale habitat. And southern resident killer whales are protected by the Species at Risk Act. And so we were like, well, geez, we've got to figure this out because we can't stop trade. We have to figure out how to deal with this. So there were three major threats facing southern resident killer whales. One of them was prey availability, so the Chinook salmon. Mm. The second was other, contaminants and anthropogenic effects. And the third was noise, underwater noise. Well, there was something maybe we could do something about. So we started this program called the ECHO program, which basically measured the acoustic footprints of vessels, different types of vessels in the shipping lanes. And we implemented slowdowns, voluntary slowdowns, and tested the different noise levels to find the optimal sort of speed for a vessel to quieten it down. And through that program, first of all, we had like 90% participation in it voluntarily, which was fantastic. But through that program, we built the world's largest non-naval database of underwater noise from ships, which in turn informed naval architecture. So you see and there was totally a good business case for doing that, because we had to figure out how we can continue to trade and grow. And so that's my favorite example, I think.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That is actually just so cool to hear. You have such a interesting career journey that is at this really cool intersection of people and policy and economics and the environment. You have a postgraduate diploma in financial strategy from the University of Oxford and a BA in communications and liberal arts certificate from Simon Fraser. How would you say your educational background and experience has kind of shaped this career path, shaped these interests, aside from your first answer and, kind of being raised on the coast?
Yeah, it's interesting because my career path, my education and ended up not being, the communications played into part of my role for many years, but the financial side of things was just recognizing that I needed to expand my wheelhouse. And if I was going to go toe to toe with the CFO on things, I needed to be able to speak the same language.
Yeah.
So that's really what drove that. It was to be able to make the case for things that I was wanting to do. But I would say what I found most valuable in my career is the collaboration. So bringing diverse interests together around a table to solve problems. In my early political career, when I was a park commissioner, I did that, but I didn't really understand what it was I was doing. It just kind of happened because of the environment that I was in. But at one point at the port, this was back in the big pipeline debates, and I was getting very frustrated because I was in the news. You'd see, the environmental activists would be, using images of a tanker spilling on all of its fuel onto Stanley Park and scaring the public. And on the other side, you had industry who was minimizing the risks of pipelines and climate change. And you had these dueling perspectives, and they weren't really well based in reality. I knew that tanker shipping was actually the safest form of shipping because of all the extra protocols that surround the movement of liquid bulk. The public didn't know that. I was seeing you'd see First Nations and industry and governments just sort of fighting this out. So I was like, well, I can't really do anything about that bigger issue. But what I can do is we obviously have responsibility to prevent oil spills in the port, and we need to understand what the best practices are. Mm-hmm. And so I knew we had good practices, but I wanted to understand what best practice would be like. So looking around the world, Norway had was doing really neat work in this space. And so, okay, that's where we should go. And so I brought together First Nations industry leaders. So like executives from Kinder Morgan and Trans Mountain, government, federal, provincial, municipal, academia, environmentalists like NGOs, and we all went to Norway together. And at the beginning of the trip, felt a little toxic because you had, these First Nations leaders, some First Nations leaders who would not talk to the industry people at all. But by the end of that trip, us all being exposed to the same information, we all came back with a really good understanding of what best practices look like. It doesn't mean that you're agreeing that we should be trading oil, but it did mean that we agreed that if oil is going to move, here are some things that we should be making sure happen. And out of that experience, that to me it completely changed my perspective in terms of how to get stuff done. And that experience, that one thing actually spawned an organization that I started, which is called the Clear Seas Center for Responsible Marine Shipping. And Clear Seas is all about that. It's about bringing together diverse perspectives and looking at the facts and doing research where there are gaps and looking at what best practices are and communicating and getting real facts out to the public and frankly to policymakers. They're the biggest users of Clear Seas information, rather than just leaving it to industry and environmentalists to go at the fight organically.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I think I had another question that was really similar to that. How would you say has collaboration and relationship building shaped your approach to leadership in such complex multi-interest environments?
Well, I think that's really the best example. But I mean, then you look at how we would approach, how that lens allowed me to approach other problems we were trying to solve. So, for example, when you're trying to advance a major project in British Columbia, particularly on the south coast of British Columbia, we are privileged to live and work and play in the traditional territories of multiple First Nations. And those First Nations have interests that for much of my time, the first half the time I was at the port, were completely not aligned with what the port was trying to do. And partly out of that Norway experience and partly out of other experiences, that really drove my desire to find a way to partner with First Nations to engage in the business of the port, not just the commercial business, but also the environmental side. As stewards we built fish habitat with them, as I already talked about. But what could we do that was deeper than that? Through that, bringing these different interests around the table, we managed to negotiate a number of agreements with First Nations, and in particular, two long-term relationship agreements between two of the most core First Nations and the Port Authority. And that was all informed by this lens of getting people together, identifying the common ground, and finding a path forward you can agree on. You may not agree on everything, but you can certainly find the things that you can work together on.
Amazing. Thank you. So, another question I'll say a bit more about yourself. You've given some amazing stories and anecdotes about your career, but what would you say have been your accomplishments you've so far been the most proud of? And what would you also say have been the largest obstacles so far in your career?
Wow. Most proud, I think on that list would certainly be the ECHO program, Clear Seas, but just in terms of from a more of an economic perspective, the growth that we were able to make happen in the port as a result of, getting those things right so that we could expand, so that we could see $9 billion invested into gateway infrastructure and see that increase in trade. I think you put it all together, and that's what I'm most proud of, is what we accomplished in that period of time was nation building, and it's spectacular. And I think my biased view is it's a great example for other sectors and organizations to follow.
Awesome. Thank you. And then also largest setbacks, obstacles in your career you feel you so far had to face.
Wow. Well, it's in a sector like the port, you are always dealing with opposition. So I don't know if I'd say at the end we managed to achieve what we were trying to do, but you would be regularly faced by opposition. Obviously there'd be environmental opposition to particular projects, communities not wanting things developed in their backyard, and even commercial opposition from tenants and people who had frankly commercial interest at stake and maybe didn't like the port, doing some of the things it was doing. But we were very clearly focused on our mandate and working on behalf of Canadians, and sometimes what a particular interest might not want is actually in the interests of Canadians. So there were setbacks for sure as we dealt with all of those issues, and there would be times where you couldn't go as far as you might want to go because of that pushback, and so it was like trying to find that right balance. So I would say I wouldn't say there was one big thing. It was sort of a lot of smaller things over time that kind of maybe meant that you were held back a bit from as far as you'd really like to go.
Really good to hear. Thank you. Also, I just wanted to confirm, you needed to leave at 10:30, correct?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. So now I just have a few questions left for you then. You were appointed to the Senate in February of 2025, a little over a year now. Congratulations on that. Year in review, what does it look like for you?
It's been fascinating. I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, first of all, it's such an honor to be able to serve in a role like this. And, it's my dream job. You're really coming to work every day and trying to make it a better country and having some significant influence. I think what was most impressive to me was the cohort in the Senate. I think if Canadians actually got to meet who sits in the Senate now for them, they would just be so impressed. And it's so disappointing to me that, what you typically hear, the narrative you hear about the Senate is, should we even have it? Should we abolish it? Should it be elected? Should it do this, do that? And my experience has been the people in that chamber care so much and so deeply about the country and bring such a vast range of interesting backgrounds and experience to the table that it's a big value add for Canada. And, you don't really know until you're in it, but it is, obviously it's a democratic institution. The senators are appointed on the recommendation of elected governments of the prime minister. So it echoes the democratic will over time. But the appointed nature of it allows us to do things that give us a lot more latitude. We can poke at uncomfortable topics and study things that maybe in the House of Commons are a little too prickly to look at. We're looking right now, one of the things one of my committees is doing, we're doing a study on labor and the supply chain. Very sensitive topic if you're dealing with it politically, because you've obviously got unions and you've got industry and you've got users. And so we can do things like that. And I think that's a huge value add. And it's something that I don't think there's enough appreciation in. And I certainly didn't have it until I was here. And now I really understand the value that the entity, the Senate provides.
Awesome. That's really cool to hear, especially just the part about if you're working in public service, the passion and the patriotism they have for the country. If I want people leading the country, it's people like that. But I guess that leads me into my next question. Based on your experience, what qualities set apart students who succeed in public service and leadership roles?
I think the number one piece of advice I have is stick-to-itness. Things that are worthwhile are never easy, and you just have to keep showing up, and you need to have the determination to be able to sometimes slog through what might be very, very challenging to get to that outcome. And I think the other piece of advice is just based on my own experience, like there is enormous power in diversity, in diverse interests around the table. And that's how you get the best decisions and the best outcomes, in my view. And if you can harness that in your career, the world's your oyster. There's just so much potential to accomplish things.
Amazing. Thank you. And a couple more questions for you. I won't keep you for too much longer. Looking back, what advice would you offer your 21-year-old self? I'm 21. I'm just about to graduate. Looking back, if you could offer anything, be greatly appreciated.
I think it would be, I remember when I was that age, it's like, what do I want to be? What do I want to do?
Yeah.
And, you sort of feel like you need to solve for that too young. If I had known that by, taking an opportunity and then seeing, and then the next opportunity, and being more open to what I'm doing and not just sort of saying, I want to go do this career and I'm just going to focus on this. That allowed me to move around and to have different experiences. And ultimately, it was that diversity of experience that led me to where I ended up. And I would say, be flexible in your career. Understand that it's not necessarily a straight path from A to B. There's a lot of zigzagging involved in accomplishing great things in your career. And so just be open to that.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I mean, that was great. Thank you. I actually wanted just one more question. I was very taken away and impressed by your story and your commitment to us LGBTQIA plus issues. You were one of the first openly gay elected officials in British Columbia as park commissioner. I happen to be gay. And I read quite a few of your stories and they were very inspiring. Thank you. Just as a last question, for students who may also happen to be gay or queer or part of the community and maybe facing other roadblocks or challenges similar to ones you may have faced, is there any advice you could give them?
We live in a very different time now. And, I had thought we had gotten past all of the challenges and issues, but we just keep coming up against new ones. I would say you stand strong and be proud. And if you come to the Senate of Canada, senators have your back. And in Ottawa, there's an entire Pride caucus that is comprised of members of parliament and senators, and then our allies. And we're, I think, well over 50 and getting stronger every day. So there are a lot of people who are there, looking out for your interests. So always remember that when the going gets tough, is you are not alone.
Thank you. Thank you. That is really wonderful to hear. And yeah, absolutely. I will say, sometimes things don't change, but I will say work your generation did before and all that effort is the reason kids my age today can come out to their parents and feel confident in a workplace. And I would like to say thank you for that. And of course, I don't want to keep you any much longer. Thank you very much for joining me, Mr. Senator Wilson. I really appreciate it. I really appreciated getting the chance to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Take care.